All right, anybody remember that jingle? Ever heard it before? Yes? Yeah, we used to play that to open all of our online services. And so, then I made it my alarm clock on my phone. Now I hate it. Anyway, yeah, it was a crazy year. So today is our third birthday, like I said before. If we haven't met before, my name is Lou. I'm one of the pastors here. And a lot of times people come in here because the church looks the way that it does, and they assume, they hear our story, or they ask why we don't have a certain program or ministry or whatever you want to call it. And my answer every single time is we look a lot older than we are. We're still kind of a baby church on baby deer legs, like trying to figure out how to stand up. And because today is our birthday, we thought we'd do something a little bit different. And so if you're new here today, if today's your first time, or maybe you came on Christmas and you decided to join us here today, it's not like this every Sunday. And it might feel a little bit like you're sitting in on a family chat, like kind of looking in from the outside. But I would suggest that this is the best week to be here for the first time, because after today, you'll know exactly who we are and exactly what we're all about and why we do the things that we do. Or maybe you've been here for a little while and maybe you've liked some things, you've had some questions, you didn't like some other things, and you've wondered, like, what's the deal with this church? Where did this church come from? Well, it's a good time to have the talk about where this church came from and where we think it's going, why we are the way that we are. So for me, when I was growing up, I actually didn't know any people who worked in a church. They, like pastors, priests, clergy members, they were kind of like, mysterious to me. I didn't understand them. I wondered why their lives were the way that they were. And then one day, I had the chance to go to a pastor's house. I played basketball with his son, and we were going to have dinner or lunch or whatever. But we went inside, and they ordered pizza. And I was sitting down at the table with my friend and his dad, the pastor. And I didn't eat because I knew we were going to say grace, This is a pastor's house, so I was expecting, big things from grace, And sure enough, he prays, and it was nice. And then he passed out some cups. And I've told some of you this story before. He poured me a tall glass of milk with my pizza. And I just thought it was the craziest thing ever, And I didn't say anything because I didn't know what was going through his mind. Is it a sin to have soda in this house? What's the deal here? But we had a dinner with a lot of dairy. There's a lot of cheese on that pizza, a lot of milk. And I just figured all right, these people, these church people, these pastors, clergy members, ministers, whatever, they're different, right? They're in a category all on their own. And I couldn't help but wonder, this guy worked in a church. Why would anyone want that? You got to think about religion and God all the time, he worked on the weekends, he worked on Sunday. At first, I thought that he only worked one day a week, and I know some of you think that about me, but it's not true. I found out he worked other days during the week as well. And he worked on Sundays, he worked on Christmas Eve, and I just wondered, really, he had to dress nice all the time. Why? Why would anyone want to do that? And I never asked him, but the question, went through my mind all the time. And now it's interesting, kind of ironic, is people ask me that same question. Sometimes with their words, and other times just with the look on their face when we have the "what do you do for a living" conversation. I've learned to avoid that conversation like the plague. It always gets uncomfortable. Unless, if I've had some time to get to know the person and they see I'm just a regular guy, then it's not weird. But if we haven't had time to cover just like regular stuff, once they ask the question, things get uncomfortable. Like they start to wonder if I've been judging them the whole time, or how many times they've used the F word in the conversation, or like you just see the discomfort, and there's this wonder, like, why would you want to do this? This guy recently came up to me. I was in the gym, and I was wearing a community church shirt, said community church on the back, and he comes up to me. At the time, I didn't really know him. He comes up to me, and he goes, that church. He goes, my daughter's friend goes there, little girl, she's been having a good time. We're thinking about going. He goes, do you go there? And I looked at him and I was like, most weeks, yes. And he was like, all right, maybe we'll see each other. Like, maybe. But it gets uncomfortable, and so I try to avoid it. Why? Because there's this question right away, like, why? Like, why would you want to do that? You have some dark past, you know? Are you like... What would possess someone to want to do that? And really what's at the heart of this question is, like, why would someone choose church? Why would anyone want to go to church? Maybe you've been on the receiving end of that question, or maybe you've been on the asking end of that question. Why would anyone want that? Now, I'm not saying why would anyone go to church, because that's an easy question to answer, right? People go to church for a lot of different reasons, because they feel like they're supposed to, because they feel like they're obligated to, because their grandmother did and she would want them to. But why would anyone like just want that? Why would anyone want that? Why would anyone want to go to church? It's interesting. Like, Jesus told stories. And often he told stories to attach emotions with principles. Like, he'd make a point and then basically try to show people, all right, this is how that's supposed to feel. And these stories, we call them parables. And there's this one parable, I have read it over and over and over and over again. And for me, it's been one of those things that has challenged me at times, but it's also clarified things for me. And especially today, when we talk about this church, the whole idea of why would anyone want to be part of a church, or why would anyone want to go to church, I think it's especially relevant. And so he's talking to this crowd of people. And he uses this term, the kingdom of heaven, which is like a general kind of category of things having to do with God. Often he would say the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven. It's this idea of what life looks like when God is king. And so it could be, one day when you die and you're up in heaven, sure, the kingdom of heaven, but also when God is king, like on earth. And so if you were to take all things having to do with God, faith, Jesus, church, and you put it in one box, that's what Jesus is talking about here. And so he says this, okay, ready? Here's how this is supposed to feel. He says, the kingdom of heaven is like think of it this way. It's like treasure hidden in a field. Now, to you and I, it sounds like random or old or something out of a kid's book, but to them it was probably not an everyday thing, but a regular thing. Like, they didn't have these big fancy banks or deposit boxes, and so if you had a lot of stuff, valuables, and you wanted to keep it safe, you would often bury it in your field. And if you died and no one knew where you put your stuff, well, then there's treasure buried in a field. And so immediately the people that are listening to Jesus, like, their ears perk up. They're like, oh, because everyone wants to hear the story about the guy who found the treasure, the guy who hit the lottery. He says it's like treasure hidden in a field. He says, when a man found it, hypothetically speaking, he hid it again, and then in his joy, with enthusiasm, excitement, like the clear, good, happy thing to do, he went and sold all he had to buy that field. And he bought that field. Now, he's not like playing games here, hiding it again. This is to find something and then put it back. For them at that time, that was the ethical thing to do. You didn't just pick it up and walk away with it. You went to find out that the land could be purchased, and then you purchase the land, and whatever was part of the land would become yours. So what he's doing here is like, it's above reproach. It's blameless. But it's a no-brainer. Now, Jesus is telling this story not to illustrate the cost, not to say you have to sell everything you have, but to illustrate the clear value of it. It's like finding a winning lottery ticket on the ground, right? You come across it, and you don't have to think about whether or not you're gonna reach down and grab it, right? It's something everybody would want. And these people, they're hearing it and they're like, yeah, well, duh, that's what he's gonna do. But the shock is not what he did. It's that Jesus is saying that life, like living life as God is the king, it's like this. It is infinitely valuable. It's a no-brainer. And when you see it clearly, like in your joy, you just go after it. It's ready, like he wants that. He wants to be part of it. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, and I explained this a little bit on Christmas Eve if you were here, for me, that doesn't line up with the reality that I lived with for many, many years. Like, and for you, like I'll ask you, honestly, if you think about like God, church, this whole concept of religion, Jesus, like is it something that brings that kind of joy? Or is it some feeling of obligation or maybe whatever? You know, like for me, like I if I was telling this story, especially years ago, I would say like, oh, the kingdom of heaven, well, really, it's like a man who finds a rule book on the ground, you know, and he picks it up and realizes he's been playing the game all wrong. And so out of obligation, he feels like he's got to start doing the right thing, right? Or it's like an insurance policy. You know, there's a premium, you got to renew every once in a while, but it's just in case, you know, just in case something happens, in case there's someone up there, in case, you know, you need help and you don't know where to look, well, he's on your side. But I don't know that I would have described it as anything close to this. And what I found is that's true for a lot of people, especially in this community. You see, like we like to say there's a villain in our story. And before you like try to guess who that villain is, you want to know how to know if he's got you, at least a little bit. If you've ever felt shame around the idea of God and the church. If you've ever felt like the church was a place like you had to be different and you couldn't be the real you. If you ever felt like you had to pretend when it came to God and church. If you ever felt inadequate, like you just couldn't measure up, unaccepted, that's how you know. You see, the villain in our story is this concept, this caricature, this picture of God that's angry, judgmental, power-hungry, closed-minded, old-fashioned, the rule-giving dictator that gets to call the shots and squishes us when he gets angry. He's big and we're small, and so some people try to make God happy and others just don't care. Like the problem here for most of us, is not necessarily that we don't believe God's real. It's that we don't believe that he's good. And so we don't want him to be real. Like I grew up genuinely hoping one day I was going to meet some really smart college professor that was going to convince me that there was no God, and then I could just throw all this out the window and not have to worry about it. That nagging voice in the back of my head will finally like be quiet. But what's amazing and what I came to see is that, this is not like some rule book you stumble across. When Jesus showed up, he showed up in a culture that surprisingly believed a lot of things about God that a lot of people here believe. That it's about the rules, that you gotta get to work, that you gotta try harder to get on the nice list with God. There are boxes you have to check to make him happy. And Jesus shows up and he totally turns this idea around. He reaches out to people that the religious community totally shunned. He radically changed the way that people think about God. Radically. He referred to him almost exclusively as a father who cares, and explained that even the things that are difficult for us to swallow, difficult to hear, are ultimately for our good. He says, he talks to the parents, who of you, if your kid asked you for bread, would give him a stone, right? Or give him something that's not good for him because you ache for the well-being of your kids. That's how you need to understand God in every context. Over and over and over again, he radically transformed the way that people thought about God, the way that people think about God. People who were nothing like Jesus loved Jesus. The people that had an issue with him, almost exclusively, were people who felt threatened by his power and popularity. But otherwise, he literally had trouble moving around because thousands flocked to him. He was attractive. Some people would even say he was irresistible. Everybody wanted a piece of him because his message was so good. It was like they had stumbled across something they all wanted. It was attractive. So he changed the way that people think about God. And the question for us, the reason I'm talking about all of this right now, is because this is how the church started. We asked this question: what if we started a church and our mission, everything that we did, was to change the way people think about God? There's this really smart theologian. He says the most important thing about you is what comes to your mind when you think of God, because it influences everything else. If you know that he's in your corner and he wants what's best for you, it totally changes the way you hear everything that he says. So what if we tried to do that? For me, really, the question was, what if we started a church for people like me? I didn't like the idea of God. I didn't like the idea of church, and I didn't like the idea of becoming a Christian, one of those Christian people. And eventually, what I came to see was that the things I didn't like about Christian people were more about the people than they were about the fact that they were Christian. The things that I didn't like about church were way more about the method than the actual mission. And the things I didn't want to believe about God were often rooted in some misunderstanding of God. In other words, the things I didn't like about this whole concept of the kingdom of heaven, I didn't have to like. But it took some asking. And if that's your story, if you're someone who's I'm not sure about God, not even is he real, but is he good? Not even do I believe he's true, but do I want him to be real? Or you're afraid of becoming one of those Christians. Maybe you should investigate the things that Jesus said to his followers, what he actually told them to do. And what you might see is that people are imperfect, and often we do a bad job of representing a good God. And maybe the things about church that turn you off are simply because of the method. and not because of the mission. In other words, maybe there's something there that is so much better than anything you've come across. And so what if we started a church that existed to change the way people think about God? And well, what would that look like? What we call our vision. If that's our mission, our vision is what the mission looks like when it's being accomplished. And then we say our vision is to be a church for people who don't go to church. Now, like some people have asked me when they hear that, they're like, but wait a minute, but I go to church. So is this church, like, am I not supposed to be here right now? No, the idea is like once you come here, you're acknowledging that you're part of this mission. Like it's no longer for you. We are perpetually looking outward. And so everything we do is intentionally designed for the person who doesn't go to church. I'll give you an example. If you've been in church for a really long time, and maybe you've got kids and you drop them off at the kids area, right? Church people tend to be really great. Not great, but really understanding when it comes to dropping kids off in the kids area. You know, it's Aunt Joan. She's been doing it for the last 20 years, and we love her and we trust her, and so your kid goes running, right? But most people who don't go to church, they don't know Aunt Joan, and they don't feel super comfortable. And if you look at any other place in our society where you drop off your kids, there's security and the environment is secure. And so I know it's a pain in the butt, but that's the reason why we make you go pick up your kids with a number. That's the reason why we have people standing there. That's the reason why we have locked doors, because we know that security is a priority to the average parent, especially one that hasn't been part of church culture. The language that we use is incredibly intentional. We want everybody to understand what's being said in every context. You don't have to agree with it, you don't have to believe it, but we do want you to understand it. And often that's a hurdle when you get into church, because there's this lofty spiritual language that's so abstract, it's hard to even understand what's being said. And so we're in every sense, from our environments to the things we say to the way we plan events, it's for people who don't go to church. That's what we want this to look like. And for you, what we want, to make it a little more concrete, is for that one person in your life. Maybe you've been in church for a little bit and you like it. You've bought in. You believe this, or you're starting to believe this. I bet there's someone in your life that you would love to be sitting next to you, that you wish were here now, or some other week when we talked about some other thing. But they're just not church people. They're just not into it. We want you to know that the day that that person comes, we've been waiting for them. We've been preparing for them. And there's not gonna be a moment where you're like, I hope he doesn't say that thing from the front this week that makes everybody uncomfortable, right? You don't have to have a conversation after the service to explain all the weird things. It's for that one person. That one person. And so 3 years ago, we started. We kicked off with nothing. When I say nothing, like I mean nothing. I remember swimming in my parents' pool in the backyard. They're like, do you know anyone over there? Is anyone gonna come to this? Like, where are you gonna get the funds? Don't you need volunteers? You don't play any instruments. You know, and everywhere we went, we were faced with all these questions. But little by little, it was like once we took a step, it was like the ball began to roll on its own. We do a whole class, or we call it the scoop, when we serve ice cream and tell the story. It's a long story. There's a lot of cool things. I'm not going to go into all the details. But all I can tell you is that like one thing after the next happened that we just cannot explain. We were approached by one family right after we announced it to the last church that I was at. They invited us over for dinner and they said, we want to sell our house and move to Babylon and help you start this church. And that was when it became real for us. We didn't ask for that, but for us, it was almost like a sign that we should keep moving forward. And then I have no musical ability, zero talent, no musical ability. And music is a big part of church. And so we started praying for people, and I knew of someone named Tom Pryor. And I knew that he may have some availability, and so we started praying for him, just asking God for Tom Pryor or someone like him. He was friends with my sister. He knew of my sister when I was growing up, and that was really all I knew. I literally wrote his name down. Days later, I went to Pennsylvania for a church conference, totally unrelated. I went to the bathroom, and at the urinal next to me was Tom Pryor. And I just looked at him. And you're not supposed to do that. And all of a sudden, he got really uncomfortable. And I didn't tell him there, but then I went into the conference and his seat was directly behind my seat. And I went home and just kind of can't believe he was there. And later on, I had to feed him a lot, take him out to a lot of breakfasts. But eventually, he decided to come on board. This woman came up to me. She said, I'm praying for you. Her name's Annette. I'll never forget. She said, I'm praying that this church will have a building on Main Street in Babylon. And I was like, okay, keep praying. We have no money in the bank account. And it's an unbelievable story. But 3 years ago, we were handed the keys to this building. It was a beautiful picture of the end of one church's season and the start of something new. It's literally something we could not have imagined. And it has been one thing after the next. And then, I don't know if you heard, but there was a pandemic and the whole world shut down. 10 weeks after we opened. We had no idea. We had no idea. I remember not wanting to cancel 2 weeks in a row because I didn't want to jump the gun. And 52 weeks later, we relaunched. But we relaunched with a totally new team in a totally renovated space. That was done, the vast majority of this was done by volunteers. We would meet downstairs in the basement with our masks on. We would talk about our values, our vision. And we'd say, all right, after 15 minutes, then we'd come up here and paint. And people would knock down walls and hang sheetrock. And somehow, after 1 year of being shut down, we opened up in a better place than we were when we closed it. And that stuff like that, we could not explain. We were also supposed to launch for the first time in April of 2020. But we decided to launch early in January of 2020. Just because if we had planned to launch in April, we would have never opened. It is just one thing after the next that we look back and feel like if we had to do this all over again, we'd have no idea what we were doing because we can't take credit for anything that's happened. When we first started, Allie and I would pray together, and I remember her saying specifically that she wanted to be part of something that only God could take the credit for. And what's been amazing is the people that believe in God, that have bought into this whole thing about Jesus, they see it and they see what God's doing. And even people that aren't quite sure about God have been looking in for the past 3 years and thinking, what is going on over there? It's unbelievable. We could not have asked or imagined. Unbelievable. And so for you, I've got 2 invitations for you, and you can feel free to reject them both. But if you're not sure about God, about church, about any of this, maybe you're new to all of it, maybe you're not sure if you like us. Often Jesus would meet people and he would just say, come and see. Just come and see. And I would encourage you to do exactly that. To just sit there and keep asking your questions and watch. Watch and listen, not just to the things that are being said, but to what's happening in this community. And you it might start to seem like there is something that cannot be explained about this church, about this group of people. Or maybe you've been here for a little while and you've been watching, you've been seeing. But when you talk about community church, you still use the word them or they. Maybe this is the year that you decide to come build with us. It doesn't mean you have to, like take a class or join a thing or sign your life away or whatever, but you bring what you have to the table. And community church for you is no longer a them, it's an us. It's no longer a they, it's a we. Literally, you do what you can. We have a wall downstairs. I don't know if you noticed, it just got built. It's because there were two guys that came in and said, we could build a wall. We have people out in the parking lot, kids, high school kids out in the parking lot that just point and tell cars where to go because that's what they could do. My daughter's 8 years old. She shows up in the morning and some Sundays she just straightens out the labels on the water bottles because that's what she could do. That's what she brings to the table. But together, each one of us is doing our part. And it's been amazing to see what can happen when each part of this body does a little bit. And so maybe for you, you decide to do that, to bring what you have to the table, to join the team. Or maybe you decide to start giving financially. We are very careful to talk about money because the church in this community, especially in the Northeast, has a reputation for being money hungry. So we're super selective. We don't pass a basket. You know if you've been here, we don't talk about it very much. That's because we don't want to push people away before they have heard about how good God is. But maybe for you, that's something you've been thinking about and you want to become a regular giver. The reality is we're not here unless people are generous. Or maybe like the most valuable thing you could do is to just bring a friend. To bring that one person, to stop thinking about them and start talking to them. Say, hey, just come with me, I'll save a seat for you. That is by far the best way you can help us change the way that people think about God. I'm gonna call the band back up here, we'll wrap up. But I wanna leave you with this story. So I heard a story from this pastor who went to China on a trip, and he had a tour guide and he had a translator. And they went through this whole thing. They were with a little group. And at the end of the tour, the guide said, does anyone have any questions? And the translator raised her hand. The translator's not supposed to ask questions, but she did. And she looked at the pastor, who's pretty well known. And she said, are you a pastor in America? And he said, yes, I am. And then she went on to tell her story. You know, in China, it's not very easy to be a follower of Jesus. They have a lot of laws regulating that stuff. You have to be really careful. But one day, somebody told her about Jesus, and she started to investigate herself. She started reading. She started hearing about what the church was supposed to be, what the church was made to be. And so while she could, she knew of an underground church, and she got on a bus and rode 2 hours every Sunday to attend that church. A church that was doing the same thing that we're doing. Probably not in the same way, probably didn't look the same, probably didn't have the fog machine, but an underground church in China where she could hear about who Jesus was and where she became part of the us. And then she looked at the pastor after having experienced all that. You know what her question wasn't? She didn't ask, why would anyone want to go to church? Her question, and this pastor said he'd never forget it, her question was, in the US, why doesn't everyone want that? Why doesn't everyone go to church? What if, because of community church, because of your part in community church, however big or small it may be, what if people in this community stopped asking the first question and began asking the second question? That's why we started this church. That's why we're here. And that's why we want you to come build with us.